All right, welcome back everyone to session 2 of the Sysmac Studio training webinars. My name is Stuart Ritchie. I'm the field engineering supervisor based out of Calgary, Alberta, and I cover Western Canada and the Pacific Northwest. So today we are focusing on the NA HMIs. What we have on the agenda is a quick rundown on the hardware and software features of the screen. Then we're going to add an HMI to our Sysmac project that we worked on Tuesday. We'll add some pages. We'll go over navigation. Then we will discuss variables and how we can essentially automatically link them all to our PLC since they'll be in the same project file. Then we'll get developing our pages, and then we can run the simulator with the PLC simulator at the same time. We'll add data logging to it. Now, the data logging won't work on the simulator, but it's good to know how to add data logging to your project. And then if we have time, I can fire up my local screen here and I can show you guys a remote access VNC demo. So the screens come in 4 different sizes, 7, 9, 12, and 15. The bezel on the outside comes in 2 flavors, black or silver. We have function keys on the bottom, these 3 capacitive touch buttons on the bottom. Now we can tie these to anything we want. We can have them start a pump in the PLC if you wanted to. We can have them pull up a specific page, that kind of thing. We can really do anything we want with those buttons, and they can be active all the time. So no matter what page you're on, button number 3 could stop your plant, something like that. We have a resistive touchscreen, so it works well with gloves and it's fairly water droplet resistant. Hardware-wise, number 1 here is a USB port for programming. And number 2, we have 2 USB ports here. These are for either memory devices for data logging or program transfer, but we can also connect a keyboard and a mouse to this if we wanted to. Some people have even connected code readers to these. Port 3 is a serial port. These are generally used when we're working with some of our older PLCs that use serial-based protocols. And number 4 here, we have dual Ethernet ports, so we can span 2 networks. We could have one connection to the controller. We could have one connection to our corporate network for remote access, that kind of thing. Number 5 is an SD card slot. So just like the USB memory that we use on number 2 here, we can do data logging and we can do program transfer with the SD card almost in the same way you would with a USB flash drive. And number 6, we have our power connector. Software-wise, we run Windows CE at the core. So this gives us some nice media viewing capabilities. So we can play videos on our screen if we want. We can have our panel drawings on our screen as a PDF. We can use the built-in PDF viewer, spreadsheet viewer, even a notepad if we wanted to make a text document, something like that. We have the usual alarming, trending, history, security. If you guys have worked on HMIs before, it's a pretty familiar look and feel for all of those things. We will develop some trends, so you will see that. We have .NET scripting that we can add if we need to. So some more advanced things that we can do with the .NET scripting, we can, push our trend data to an FTP server with some .NET scripting if we wanted to. There's loads of things we can do with the .NET scripting that fall outside of kind of typical scenarios for the HMI. We use VNC for remote access. And we have a tool built in the HMI called the PLC troubleshooter. So if you were online with a PLC that had a fault on it of some kind, in Sysmac Studio, we can open up our troubleshooter and it's going to tell us exactly what that fault is, and it's going to suggest remedial actions, that kind of thing. We can embed that into our HMI. So if somebody calls you up and they say, we've got the blinking red light on the PLC, what's going on? You could actually get them to open up the PLC troubleshooter and they'll have the exact same interface that you would with Sysmac Studio. So could save you a trip to site. It is optional. If you like those trips to site, when I was an integrator, I sure did. And we do parallel task execution. So speeds things up when you're starting to get into more advanced subroutines and things like that with your scripting. Okay, Sysmac time. I'll get everyone to open up the project from last class if you haven't already. Now, we were a little short on time, and there's one line of code that I'd like to get everyone to add, and it's this very last one here. It's just giving the alarm beacon the same functionality as the red LED on our stop push button has. And I'll zoom in a bit here for you. So open up your Sysmac project and add the logic for line 10. Give everyone a second to do that. Now, while you're doing that, did anybody not receive the student material download link that I sent out? I sent it out on Tuesday, an hour or two before class. So if anyone did not receive that, let me know and I can post the drive link in chat and you can download that right now because we're going to be using a lot of stuff from that student material today. Good. Does anyone need more time to add this last rung to their program? Okay, so in Sysmac, as I mentioned on day one, we can have multiple devices in a project. So right now we just have a PLC. So we're going to add an HMI to our project. So up at the top at the Windows menu, if we go to Insert, we go to HMI, and we choose an NA5. I'll get everyone to choose a 12-inch. It doesn't matter if it's a V1 or a non-V1. And as far as the version goes, that doesn't matter either. If you don't have 117 on yours, just pick the highest version. For what we're doing today, it's fine. Once you've selected your screen, hit OK. And Sysmac will add an HMI to your project. So now at the top of our Multi-View Explorer, we've got a drop down so we can choose between our PLC and our HMI. Now, when we're developing simultaneously the PLC and the HMI, there will be multiple tabs up at the top. So we don't need to flip between them every time we want to, change a line of code or add an object to a page. Sysmac will keep the tabs open at the top and you can navigate to them like you would in a web browser. So a quick kind of rundown on the HMIs in Sysmac Studio. Similar to the PLCs we have in our Multi-View Explorer, our configurations and setup. So HMI settings is where we would set up our IP address, our startup screen, where we would set up our VNC, our FTP. We're not going to go over every single settings. A lot of them are fairly self-explanatory, but what I will get everyone to do in your HMI settings is in the VNC category, we're going to check off use. So this will turn on the VNC server in the NA-HMI. And the mode, I'm going to choose view and operate. You can do view only or view and operate. And for password, I'm just going to use password. So that's all we need to do for VNC. And I just wanted you guys to enable this as kind of a reference point for the future. Now, when I transfer this to my HMI, I can connect to my HMI with any VNC viewer. There are loads of free ones out there. And we can remotely control and view our HMI over VNC. The bottom section of the Multi-View Explorer is where we do our page development. So if we expand pages, you'll see by default we have page 0. That's also where we would set up our data logging, any custom data types that are HMI only, we would set up there. We can have global events, global subroutines. This is a very kind of introductory course, so we're not going to dive into each one of these. Otherwise, this would just take way too long. So what I will get everyone to do now is we're going to add 4 pages to our project. We have 1, so we'll add 3 more. So if we right-click on pages, and we go to add page. So we can do that 3 times. So we have a total of 4 pages. Now we're going to rename the pages. So page 1, if we right click on it, we can rename it. We'll call it main. And if it pops up, do you replace overlapped page names in the device? Just click yes. Second page, we're going to rename set points. Third page, we will call service. And the fourth page, we will call background. So I'll give everyone a second to do that. Again, that's main, set points, service, and background. Does anyone need more time for that? Good. So the first thing we'll do is we will double click on our background page. And this will bring up the page development environment. So our toolbox has been populated with HMI objects, and they're categorized just like the ladder logic instructions were in our PLC. Now, what we're going to do with the background page is we are going to make 3 navigation buttons to cycle between the 3 pages in our project. But by doing them on a background page, we can use that page as the background for the 3 main pages. And then any changes we need to do, we can just do it to one page and it will be reflected to the rest of the pages, and it will keep everything a consistent look and feel. So in Sysmac, if we expand the buttons category, you can see we only have 5 buttons to choose from here. A standard button, a momentary button, a set, a reset, and a toggle button. So similar to how we had 1 input and 1 output, and you selected what they do in the PLC programming environment, we don't have very many buttons, but we have a lot of actions that we can assign to the buttons. So this is, again, another way to clean up our toolbox and not have 36 different buttons to accomplish all the different possible things you could with a button. So we'll add 3 momentary buttons to our screen, and we'll just drag and drop them down at the bottom, kind of spaced out evenly. Now, when we're programming the HMI, anytime we double click on something, it will bring up the properties where the toolbox was. And these are the most common properties that you would set on an object. We can go into detailed properties if we want to get into some of the more advanced things like security and stuff like that. But for what we're doing today, we're just going to stick with the standard properties. Now, the text on each button we're going to modify. We're also going to assign each button an action. So for the first button, where it says momentary button on the text button up category on the right-hand side, we're going to call this main. And when we click away, you'll see that the text has been updated to main. Now everyone can change the text on the other 2 buttons to set points and service. You can also double click on the text within the button and edit it directly if it's more convenient. Does anyone need more time with that? So now I'll get everyone to select all of the buttons. You can click and drag to select multiple objects on the screen. And when we have multiple objects selected, any parameter that each of the objects shares, we can mass edit that parameter. So since we have them all selected, we can increase the font size, we can make it bold, and you can even resize the buttons so that they're all the same size. So if we expand the font category in our properties, we can choose a size. It's going to kind of click on mine until they look about right. I'm going to make my text bold so it's a bit easier to read. And then I'm going to resize the buttons. By resizing just one of them, that size will be shared with the rest of them as well. Now I'm just going to place them on the bottom. So they don't take up a whole lot of real estate on the screen, but they're big enough that we can use them. So I'll give everyone a second to do that. Does anyone need more time? Okay. So now we'll get everyone to double click on main. We'll do that one first. Now, up in the top right-hand corner of the properties window, there's a picture of a lightning bolt with a little arrow on it. When you click on that, that opens up the events and actions for that button. Now, if you're on a much older version of Sysmac, you might not have that, in which case you can go up to View, Events and Actions, and it will bring up the exact same thing. So the action that we want to assign to that button is going to be a click action. And the action that we specifically want to add is going to be a show page action. So everything is alphabetical in this list. So we'll choose show page, and then the page name, as I'm sure you probably assumed, is going to be main, and it should autofill that for you once you start typing. So again, that's a click event. We're going to do show page, and page name will be main. Then we'll repeat that process for set points and service, and we'll assign the set point and service screen to those buttons. Give everyone a second to do that. And if you're having any issues, feel free to speak up. Okay, does anyone need more time? Good. Now we'll get everyone to go to their toolbox and we'll go into the shapes category. And we're just going to grab a rectangle, drag and drop it onto our page. And I'm just going to kind of box those buttons in with a rectangle, just to give them kind of a background. Now, when you put something on the page, it's placed on top of other things. So we need to change the order. And by right-clicking on the object, you can send it to the back. And that should make your buttons visible. And if you're not a fan of the default cornflower blue color, then feel free to change it. Does anyone need more time? Good. So now that we're done our background page, we're going to assign this background page to the first 3 main pages of our project. So if we double click on main and then just double click anywhere on the screen, it will bring up the properties for that page. And the second last category under behavior is the background page. And then we can just type background. And as soon as we assign that as a background page, you can see it's kind of grayed out, but you can see where those buttons and that border that we created will lie on your screen. So we'll repeat that process for the next 2 screens, the set points and the service. And now if for some reason I wanted to add a page for something, I wouldn't have to update the navigation on every single page. I would just have to update it on the background page, and it would be reflected identically on all the other pages. Is anybody having any issues with that? Or does anyone need any more time? Good. So before we start diving too deep into our main page here, I'm going to do something called the variable mapping. So we have lots of variables in our PLC, and we need to use a lot of those variables on the HMI. If we go to the configurations and setup category in our multi-view Explorer, there's a category called variable mapping. So I'll get everyone to double click on that. Now this will list all of the PLCs in your project. We just have one, so we can expand new controller 0, and we can drill down to user variables. So these should all look familiar because they're all the variables that we created in the PLC that were global variables. Now we could assign a variable name, whatever name we wanted, but there's a time-saving trick that I like to use. And if we right-click on user variables, I'm gonna have to click away. There you go. You can create the device variable with a prefix. And if you had multiple PLCs that were identical, a prefix would be very handy. But since we just have one PLC, if we choose none as our prefix, it's going to just mirror the tag name in the PLC on the HMI. So I'll get everyone to choose none as the prefix, click OK, and now we have identical variable names in the HMI as we do in the PLC. So high set point on our HMI is high set point on our PLC. Now, anytime we create a new variable in our PLC and we want to get that variable on our HMI, we'll come back here and we can repeat that process. Does anyone need more time with that? Good. So I'll get everyone to go to their main page and open up the toolbox. So the first thing we're going to add is our background image. And if we go into the standard controls category, there's an image object. So we can drag and drop that onto our screen and just tuck it down in the bottom left corner. And when we double click on that image, there's a category for image file. And we don't have any images loaded on this HMI. So by clicking to the right of the dropdown where the 3 dots are, it's going to bring up a file explorer. And we can navigate to the student material folders that I sent out. And in session 2, there's one called HMI images. And grab this. This is a different file name. I'm using a different image from a previous session, but it's going to be the same picture that you guys have. I think it's called ground on yours, but it's one of 2 images. It's not Fake Company. So click on open once you've selected that image from the student material. And we're just going to leave it off on the bottom left. Sometimes it makes things tricky when you have a background image. You can accidentally click on it, and then you have to click outside of the screen to unselect it. So I like to, when I'm working with background images, drag them across the entirety of the screen. It's kind of the very last thing I do. So we'll leave that down there in the bottom left. Was everyone able to open their image that was sent out? Now we'll add some graphics to the screen. So back in our toolbox, we're going to scroll down to the tanks category, and we will grab medium tank 3 to use as our ground tank. We can drag and drop that onto our screen. And we can make it a bit bigger. Once we have the pumps and the pipes in there and everything, we'll kind of resize everything so it looks good. So everyone can grab medium tank 3 from their toolbox, and then we'll grab from the pipes category let's see which one. There we go. So I'll get everyone to grab the pipe straight vertical and just drag it on top of your tank. The pipe straight horizontal, the pipe 90-degree top left, so again, that's pipe 90-degree top left, pipe straight horizontal, and pipe straight vertical. Now, as long as we don't resize these pipes horizontally, they should line up if you're using the same category of pipe. So we're essentially going to make a pipe that comes out of the tank and shoots off to the right-hand side of the screen. The pump will be at the bottom of the tank, so we'll need to stretch out the vertical pipe a bit. And the horizontal pipe will stretch out just to mate up with everything else. Does anyone need more time for that? Okay, good. So back in our toolbox, the next thing we'll drop on the screen is going to be from the shapes category. And we'll grab another rectangle and we're going to drop it at the bottom of the pipe. So this is going to be kind of the background to our motor. And this will change color if the motor's on. It's going to be kind of our run indicator. If you had images of pumps that were a different color, we could cycle between those two. I'll get everyone to drop a rectangle right near the bottom of the tank. And if we double click on that rectangle, it'll bring up the properties for it. Now, what we're going to do with that rectangle is we're going to assign an animation to it to change the color. So up at the top of the screen on the Windows menu, if we go to View, Animations, that will open up the Animations tab for us. And the animation that we want to add to it is going to be a color change animation. And we want the Boolean color change since we're going to be referencing a Boolean variable. So the expression for this animation, we can put a tag there, which is what we'll do. But if we need to compare multiple expressions and or conditions to generate an expression, it's actually quite flexible for that. So you might want to have a greater than or less than comparison in there, anded with multiple Booleans to get your animation expression satisfied. But for this one, we will just put the motor start, or sorry, start motor. That's the bit that will be true when our motor's on. So we'll choose that as our expression. Ray, yes. So they will be open next time you open the project. Ray asked if the events and actions in the animations tab will be open permanently now, and yes, they will. When you save the project and reopen it, they should be permanently open for you. So for our animation now, the off color, I'm just going to choose a grayish color, and the on color, I'm going to leave it green. So I'll give everyone a second to add that animation to their rectangle. Does anyone need more time? Okay, good. So now we'll just go back to our toolbox and we'll throw a pump on top of that rectangle to show that that's actually a pump that'll be turning on and off. So in the pumps category, we'll grab pump 3, which has a vertical discharge, and we can drop it on top, resize it how we would like. And if you want to resize the rectangle to accommodate it, feel free. Now, the next thing we'll add is going to be a gauge to give us a visual representation of the tank level. So if you recall, we have an analog level sensor in that tank, and we get a scaled value of 0 to 100% for our tank level. So in the gauges category, there's something called a blue horizontal gauge. So I'll get everyone to drag and drop from the gauges category, the blue horizontal gauge, and just drop it anywhere. Now, when we double click on that gauge, we're going to change it to a vertical gauge from a horizontal gauge. I'm going to keep the background color blue. And for the expression, this will be the tag that tells us how full our tank is. So if you remember from Tuesday, that tag is tank level scaled. So we'll double click on that. And the range by default is 0 to 100. So that's perfect for us. But if we had to customize that range or you wanted different intervals, you could. Once you've got that gauge flipped, you can just drop it right on top of the tank for our visual representation of the tank level. Does anyone need more time with that? Good. So the last two animation-related objects that we're going to add are just going to be some visual indicators for the level switch low-low alarm, as well as the motor fault alarm. So in the standard controls category, there's something called a label, which is just a text box. So I'll get everyone to drag a label out onto their screen somewhere. And we'll double click on it to bring up the properties. And I'm going to we'll do the level switch first. So I'll call mine LSLL as the text property. I'm going to make the text color black, and I'm going to make the background color solid red. I'm just going to bump the size up a little bit, make it bold, so it's a bit easier to see on a 12-inch screen. Now the animations tab should still be accessible to you on the right-hand side of the IDE. So if we click on that tab, we'll have different animations available to us. So what we'll be looking for is a visibility animation on this one. So if we choose visibility, we don't have any options other than an expression. So if the expression is true, it's visible. If the expression is false, it's invisible. So the visibility tag that we want to use for this will be our level switch low alarm, which should just be LSLL_alarm. And then we'll put the level switch low somewhere near the bottom of the tank. Now to save us some time for the motor fault, I'm going to copy and paste this LSLL label, and I can just Control-C, Control-V, or you can right-click on it. And by doing it this way, it's also going to copy that animation that we assigned to it. So obviously we'll need to change the text and we'll need to change the tag for the visibility animation, but that can save you time when you're doing a similar operation like this. So I'm going to make the copy and pasted label the fault as the text, and we're going to change the tag to the motor fault alarm. Ray had a question if we could change the size of an object graphically, as in an animation. And there's actually a few neat things you can do with rectangle animations to do that. There's a fill animation that I like to use in situations like that, percentage fill, but we can also change the height and the width with an animation variable, yes. Okay, so when everybody's done their motor alarm animation, we'll move on to the next step. Does anyone need more time? Good. So the next thing we'll add to the HMI is going to be start, stop, and reset buttons. Now, if you've tried to do this before with a PLC, we cannot write to a digital input variable. We could add it to the HMI, we could try, but it's not going to work because the digital input state is going to overwrite the variable at the start of every scan cycle. So what we'll do is we'll have another start push button variable in our PLC that only the HMI uses, and it's going to behave in the same way as our start push button. So everyone can navigate back to their PLC. You can do it from the drop down at the top of the Multi-View Explorer. And then we'll go into the main control program. And rung 1 and rung 2 are where we have our start push button and our stop push button. So I'll get everyone to drag a contact out of their toolbox in ladder tools. And because we want to OR these conditions or parallel them, we'll drag that contact directly on top of the start push button, and that should create an OR condition. We'll do the same thing with the stop push button, create an OR condition. And then we'll tag those start push button HMI and stop push button HMI. And we will need to make them global if you want to use them on the HMI. And I'm also going to make those a diff up instruction. So if I right click on start PB HMI, I can choose diff up. So this will only be true when the tag is true, and it will only let power flow through it essentially for one scan of the program. In the odd, very uncommon scenario of your HMI loses communication, there's nothing there to reset that bit, and you don't want to have the start bit on the whole time. Happened to a customer of mine a long time ago, but it's kind of a practice that I implement. So we'll do the start push button HMI, the stop push button HMI, and then same thing for the reset push button down here on rung number 7. We'll parallel the reset push button, and we'll make one for the HMI. Okay, does anyone need more time with that? Good. So if you remember in our HMI, I'd mentioned if we make a new variable in the PLC, we need to go back to our variable mapping, drill down to our user variables, and you can see here the 3 new variables we created are there, but they don't have a variable for the HMI. So we can repeat that process of creating a device variable with prefix, choosing none as a prefix, and that has tagged them exactly how they're tagged in the PLC. Give everyone a second to do that. Does anyone need more time? Good. So back on our main control page on the HMI, here it is. We're going to add 3 buttons to the screen for the start, stop, and reset. So I'm going to pick a momentary button for that. So we'll drag 3 momentary buttons out onto the screen. And for the start at the top, we're going to assign a variable to it in our properties. So you may notice one of the categories has a red box around it. And here we'll put the HMI variable that we created for the start push button. We'll do the same thing for the stop and the reset. And we'll also change the text on the buttons themselves. So it's momentary button by default. We'll change that to start. And the button down text, you can just delete that. That will display that text when your finger's on the button. So I'll get everyone to tag the rest of their buttons and change the text on their buttons according to what they do. Does anyone need more time with that? So now, just like we did a mass edit on our navigation buttons, we can do the same thing because these are 3 identical objects on the screen. So if I highlight all of them, I can increase the font size a bit so it's more legible. I can make the style bold. And I'm going to change the design of my buttons to an ellipse so they're circular. And then we can resize them to a size that would be easy enough to press, space them out, how you'd like. Does anyone need more time with that? Good. So now we're pretty much done with our main page development. So I'll get everyone to click on that background image that we have tucked away in the bottom left corner. And we're going to change the aspect ratio. We're going to unlock that aspect ratio. And that will let us freely scale the image. So for something like a background image like this, it's not really going to matter if it's a bit distorted. And then we can basically drag that across the entirety of our screen. Now we're going to go to the set point screen and work on our set points. So in our toolbox, if we want to edit a numeric variable in the PLC, we're going to go to our standard controls category, and we're going to grab a data edit object, and we'll drag that onto our screen. Make it a bit bigger. We'll increase the font size at the end here. But if you double click on that data edit object, there are a bunch of different properties that we can assign to it. So the variable, we're going to make the first one for the high set point, which is just HI_SP. The minimum and maximum values we're going to modify. So for the high set point, I'm going to choose 50 as the minimum value, 100 as the maximum value. And for our display format, I'm going to choose 3 numbers. And when you've got all that set up and you've resized it to about the size you want, you can increase the font size so that it's a bit more legible. And if you want to have it centered instead of aligned to the right, you can change the horizontal alignment. I like to make mine bold. Now back in our toolbox, in the standard controls category, we'll grab a label for that, and we'll call that our high set point. Actually, we'll call it our start set point. And again, we'll adjust the size. I'm going to make mine bold. And once I have that, I'm going to select both the label and the data entry object, and I'm just going to copy and paste it, drag it directly below, and we'll make one for the stop set point. So modify your text, modify your variable. Does anyone need more time with that? One thing I did forget is because we have limits on the data entry box, for the low set point, I want the maximum to be 49 and the minimum to be 10. And I'm doing this so they don't overlap, because we don't want to have a stop set point higher than a start set point in this case. So one thing that operators like to see is a trend of data. So we can add a trend to our HMI, and I'm going to put it on the starts or the set point screen, sorry, so that we can see what the tank has been doing for the last hour or so. So I'll get everyone in the Multi-View Explorer, we have a category called data logging. So if we right click on data logging and we go to add data set, we'll create data set 0 by default. You could rename it if you want. And when we double click on data set 0, this is where we set up the data logging parameters for this specific data set. We can have multiple data sets if we want. So the target device is where we will store this trend data. So is it going to be in a flash drive or is it going to be on the SD card? We can customize the folder name if we want, and we can also choose the interval at which we want to log this. So I'm going to leave all of these defaulted. I am going to change it to a daily log file because this isn't a whole lot of data. So a daily log file shouldn't be crazy big. And then at the bottom of this screen, there's a little plus button where we can add a tag to log. So the variable is going to be the tank level scaled. That's what we want to trend. And it's auto-detected the data type. And if we wanted to comment it, we could. But this is all we need to do for now. And this is set up trending for this particular tag. We can have multiple tags. We can have multiple data sets. We only really need to trend one for this. So now that our data set has been set up to log our tank level, we can go back to our set point screen. And in the toolbox, we have in standard controls, HMI controls, I think. Yes, we have a trend graph in our HMI controls. So we can drag and drop that onto the screen and resize it so it's got enough real estate to be visible. And when we double click on the trend graph, it's going to ask us in the properties for a data set. So there's only one data set. So if you just start typing data set, it should detect data set 0 and let us autofill that. And then we're going to add an analog trace since this is an analog value. So next to the analog traces, there is a little plus sign. So we'll click on that. And here we can add the tank level scaled from our data set. And we can choose a color. I'm going to leave it blue since it's water, more or less. So I'll give everyone a second to do that. So again, we have to add our data set 0, and then we click the plus sign next to the analog trace. And then we choose the tank level scaled variable as the trace item to add. Now we'll give it a name. It's defaulted analog trace 0. I'm going to call this tank level. Then we can close out of that, and you can see now in our trend picture, we have the tank level on the right, and we have the color that the tank level is. Now, by default, our axis is 0 to 100, which works perfect for us since our tank level is 0 to 100, but these are configurable as well. So I'll leave the tank level there. We're done with the trend graph. Does anybody need more time, or is anyone having any issues? Oh, sorry. In the trace settings, I forgot this has to be tank underscore level. There are some naming conventions there that you need to follow. So you can go back into your analog trace settings and change tank level to tank underscore level. If you need to get back there, you just click on the plus next to the analog traces, and that will bring up the tank level. Does anyone need more time with that? So we have one more screen to do, and it's a fairly quick one. So I'll get everyone to go to the service screen. And the first thing we'll grab from our toolbox is in standard controls, and it's an image object. And I'll get you guys to drop that right in kind of the top middle of your screen. And the image that we're going to choose is the fake company image file that is included in the student material. And you can resize it how you'd like. And then back in our toolbox, we're going to put 3 buttons on the screen. And we'll just use regular buttons for this. So we'll drag 3 buttons just kind of on the left-hand side of the screen. And these buttons are going to have actions. So we'll go to the Events and Actions tab on the right-hand side. And the events for these buttons will be click events, and we are going to show a document full screen. Now, the documents that you'll be showing are included in the student material. So the first one will be it's in the HMI documents folder. The first one will be the NX1P2 datasheet, and it's a PDF. So you can select that in the file browser. And now we'll change the text on that button to PLC datasheet. For the next button down, we'll change the text to HMI datasheet. And the event in action will be a click action, and we're going to show a document full screen, and it will be the HMI datasheet, the NA datasheet. Now, the last button we are going to call pizza. This will make more sense once you understand what it does. So the text will read pizza. For the animation, it will be the same. The events and actions will have a click action, and the document that we are going to show is the menu PDF from the student material folder. So I'll give everyone a second to do that. If you're having any issues, now's a good time to speak out. Okay, does anyone need more time? Okay, so the last thing we'll do before we simulate the screen with our PLC is actually something that I forgot to do on the first session. So if everyone can navigate back to their PLC, select it in the Multi-View Explorer, and we're going to go into the data section, and we're going to go to our global variables. So our high set point and our low set point tag, we forgot to make retained on the first day, so you can check off the retained attribute. And this retained feature will actually work in the simulator as well. So if you're starting and stopping your simulator a lot, it's actually going to hold those values when you restart your simulator. Okay, so now when we run the simulator this time, we are going to go down to the very bottom of the simulation menu, and we're going to run it with the NA simulator. So it's going to ask you which HMI you want to simulate. We only have one in the project, so we're just going to click OK on the default there. So we're going to build a virtual PLC and a virtual HMI. The first time you do this takes a bit longer than sequential times. But what will happen is we'll have the exact same simulation environment in our PLC that we got to look at on day one. And shortly after that fires up, a window will pop up, which is your virtual HMI. And if there's a variable on your HMI or an object on your HMI that's tied to something in your PLC, they will have the same interaction as they would on a live system. So my PLC simulator is fired up. I can look at my logic. I can simulate values, and my HMI simulator just popped up over on the other screen. So now I have my HMI simulator. So this is great when you have an external monitor. You can simulate the HMI on one, you can have the PLC on the other. So what we'll do now is we will just essentially do the same simulation that we did on day one at the end of the class. So we'll give it set points, and we can do that from our set point screen. So we'll give it a start set point of 75. We'll give it a stop set point of 25. And if you recall how we made simulating a lot more convenient in our PLC, we use something called the watch tab. So that should still be open in your project, and that should still have the raw tank level visible on the watch tab. So we can modify this now, and we'll see that tank level change on the HMI. So I'll give it a value of 4,000, which is 50%. And if I look at the screen, you can see my tank level gauge is now reading 50%. So I'll give everyone a few minutes now to play around with the simulator. You can start and stop your plant. You can trip alarm bits, see the indications on the animations, that kind of thing. I just set my tank level to 80-something% and my pump kicked on. I can bring that tank level down to 50%. And my pump should remain on. Then I can take that below the low set point, and my pump should turn off. And then I'll put it. Now I'll go and simulate some alarms and see the visibility animations working on my screen. And I can test the functionality of my reset button by clearing those alarms, or at least the inputs for those alarms, and verifying that those animations go away when I hit the reset button, which they do. So is anybody having any issues with the simulator? I know, Max, I've been trying to find a workaround for you not having administrator rights. Did you ever get the simulator sorted out?
No, I
No?
didn't.
Okay.
Thank you for helping.
Yeah, that's one thing with Sysmac is having an administrator account can alleviate a lot of little problems that can pop up. Okay, so is everybody able to run their simulator? If you had any errors in either the PLC or the HMI, it probably won't start up. So we could address those now if anyone's having any issues. On the service screen, so the trends don't work in the simulator, but I will show you on an actual HMI what they look like. But in the service screen, you can click on any of the items that you added, like the pizza button, and that's just going to open up a PDF viewer on your computer. It will actually display this on the HMI if you were looking at this on an HMI. So any issues, any questions? Good, you guys are on the ball. Okay, so to stop our simulator now, we can, in the bottom right-hand corner of Sysmac, we can stop there's a little stop button under the PLC. You can also stop it by just closing the HMI. That will do the same thing. But now we're back and we can edit whatever we need to. So one thing that the buttons in the control room have are LED indicators on the start and stop push buttons. So what we'll do next is we'll go into our toolbox and we'll grab two shapes and we'll place them behind the start and stop push buttons. And they will reflect the color of those LEDs, and they will flash or they will be solid according to what the button is. And this will just help us show the operator what mode we're in or if we have any alarms. So I'll get everyone to just drop two rectangles behind their push buttons. The easiest way to do this is to just drag the button to the front instead of sending the button or the rectangle back, because you might accidentally send it behind the background image. So we can bring the buttons to the front after we've added our rectangles. And if you need to space your buttons out a bit more for this, go ahead. And instead of doing a color change animation for these, what we're going to do is a visibility animation. So for the start button, if we open up the properties of that rectangle, we're going to change the color to green, since that's the color of our LED. on the start button. And then for the rectangle behind the stop button, we're going to give that a color of red. And for the animations, we're going to use the tags that are going to the outputs of those LEDs. So for animations, we're going to add an animation to each of those, and it will be a visibility animation this time. So for the stop push button, I'm going to use the stop PB or stop LED. Sorry, that's the tag for the stop LED. And then for the start push buttons rectangle, I'm going to use make sure you have the rectangle and not the button. I'm going to do a visibility animation, but I'm going to use the start LED. Does anyone need more time for that? Okay, so once you've added those, you can go ahead and fire up your simulator. And if you're running the simulator from an HMI page, you're going to run it with a controller simulator. If you're running the simulator from something in the PLC, you're going to run it with the NA simulator. So it's generally just the last option in the simulator menu there. Now the simulator will start up much quicker the second time. And now we have the LED indicators showing what they're showing on the physical push buttons. So we switch the plant to start, we're solid green, stop, we're solid red. If we trip one of our alarm bits in our PLC program, I'll do the level switch, for example, then we should see that same flashing on our stop button that we have there. Now, the Sysmac HMIs have an alarm management system built into them. So if we added those alarm bits to our kind of internal alarm server in our HMI, we have a lot of convenient features for acknowledging alarms, recording the time that they happened, the time that they were acknowledged. So if you've worked with HMIs before, we have a very similar alarm management system to what you're probably used to. We didn't bother with this one just to keep it short and the fact that there are only 2 alarms, but we could add alarm management to this project and have a full-blown history and, the occurrence time recorded, that kind of thing. But for now, everybody can play around with their simulator. We've made pretty good time today. Normally we have a couple issues along the way on the HMI class, but you guys have kept up and not had any issues. So we've got a couple extra minutes here. So I'm going to dump this project on an actual NA now, so I can demonstrate what VNC looks like. So my screen is not a V1, so I'm just going to change the model here. Apologize for the beeping. We can disable that in the screen. So here I have a VNC viewer. I've got my project on my HMI, and we enabled VNC, if you remember. So this is a live view of that HMI. So I was trying to explain what the PDFs look like on the HMI themselves. So I can open up the pizza menu on the HMI, and there's an integrated PDF viewer that will display it. And we can do the typical things like zoom in, zoom out, scroll, pan, zoom, that kind of thing. And for trending, this isn't set up currently, but our trends will display the trend you would be expecting. So that is all of the content that we have for today. Does anybody have any questions on anything we've covered, or is there anything you're curious on how you would do it on the NAHMI?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
Can you hide an object while you are editing on the screen?
Like while you're simulating, or while you're connected to an HMI?
No, while you are editing the screen. Let's take for instance, you have different tanks. You want to hide one while you are creating the other one.
So do you mean, can you kind of edit more than one page simultaneously?
No, I mean hiding an object, just not to see it at the screen at the moment.
Oh, are you referring to something like the background image?
Yeah, any object.
Object. No, I mean we could do it at runtime with animations, but from the editing environment, there's no way to kind of disable an object on the screen that I'm aware of. Wilson on the call? No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
Let's see here. Oh, we can turn off the visibility property. Just curious, but yeah, it still shows it in the edit environment. It just won't be visible at runtime. So no, I'm going to say no to that one.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, well, if nobody has any other questions, you can jump off now. I'm going to hang out on the call for 10 minutes if anybody's got any issues they want to discuss. Otherwise, we'll give you back 8 minutes of your day here. Thanks again for jumping on, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.